Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, going out to the Pac-12 to talk Washington, of course, defending Pac-12 champion 2 of the last 3 years. In fact, we got Chris Fetters on the line from Dogman 247 Sports. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Good, Mark. How are you?
I am doing great. We appreciate you stopping by. Of course, we want to get everyone set for the 2019 season. The Huskies, of course, defending their championship out in the Pac-12. And it was assumed by most of us, and I know we had this conversation during the offseason a few times, and you said, whoa, there is a quarterback competition, and it's more serious than you and other people know across the country, because when the likes of Jacob Eason head back home, we just assume he's the guy. He may end up being the guy, but certainly that's not been officially announced yet.
That's right. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but unofficially it's been announced. So yeah, it's one of those things where, we all thought just like you. I mean, it was the same thing. We just assumed that Eason, who was a star at Lake Stevens High School, just north of Seattle, he was going to be the guy coming back. Played the year at Georgia, had a great season, then got hurt, Jake Fromm took over, and then he was never able to get his job again. So he came back, transferred, sat out the year last year, and now he seemed like he was going to be the heir apparent to Jake Browning. But Jake Haener had a little something to say about that, and they've kind of gone back and forth all spring and fall. And, now it really looks like Jacob Eason has won the job. I mean, it looks like it just came out. Chris Peterson actually will be in front of the media on Friday, so hopefully he'll say something about it. But basically everyone in the media here in Seattle has said that their sources are telling them that Jacob Eason's won the job. So that's huge news for Washington. Basically everyone in the Pac-12 has kind of already named their starting quarterbacks. So it's good that Washington has kind of gotten this thing out of the way with a week to go. I know they still have a lot of work to go in terms of getting their preparations underway. They play Eastern Washington on Saturday the 31st, and I know a lot of people are wondering, no, Eastern Washington's no big deal, but they were a finalist in the FCS championship game last year. They have won a national championship at that level before, so Washington's played them twice actually in the last 10 years, and both games went down basically to the last series of the game. The second one was in Chris Peterson's first year. Washington won 59-52. And that's when Vernon Adams, who ended up transferring to Oregon, Vernon Adams was their quarterback, and Cooper Kupp, now with the Rams, was their main wide receiver. And they had a field day against the Huskies. So Eastern Washington is not going to be a pushover by any means. But again, kind of getting this distraction out of the way, getting Jacob Eason named as the starting quarterback, it's good. It's a good bit of news for Huskies fans. And obviously kind of confirmed what we all suspected going in, that Jacob Eason should have probably been the one that was going to win the job all along.
Now, Chris, as you mentioned, quarterback competitions all over the country, and I think one of the worst scenarios for a head coach and an offensive coordinator is when they have two different styles of quarterbacks, and then they're making a decision 7 to 10 days before the season starts, and then what ends up happening is one guy wins the job, and then the offense has to have a certain look and a certain approach because of the skill set of the quarterback who wins the job. Now, in looking at the quarterback battle that is ensuing there at Washington, is it a case in which the offense is going to look much different depending on the winner of the quarterback competition?
No, not at all. Chris Peterson has his system that he brought in from Boise. Jonathan Smith ran it for the first few years, and now Bush Hamden's running it. Both are well-versed in what Chris Peterson wants and kind of that multiple attack. And they even brought in Jeff Tedford back in 2016 to kind of help things before Tedford took over at Fresno State. So they've got, a really good idea of what they like, what they feel works with the personnel that they have. And they're not going to be looking to change things up and have packages for dual threat guys and that kind of stuff. They run their stuff and they recruit to their stuff. And even though, Jacob Eason didn't originally go to Washington, Chris Peterson and Jonathan Smith actively recruited Eason pretty hard when they got to Washington, but it was just too late. I mean, Kirby Smart and Mark Richt before him had really laid down the marker in terms of recruiting Eason and making him the number one priority for them at quarterback at Georgia. So there was just way, way too much ground to make up. So they still felt, Peterson and Smith, they still felt that Eason was a great fit for what they wanted to do. It just, the timing didn't work out very well. And now we're going to find out if the timing and the fit and everything else is going to match up now, because again, this is a guy they liked. Circumstances didn't dictate that he went to Washington the first time. Now he's back at Washington, and we'll see what happens.
Chris Fetter's here to talk Washington football. You can catch him and the rest of the staff there at 247 Sports Dogman covering the Huskies as they get prepared for Eastern Washington a week from Saturday, August 31st. Chris, 13 starters gone, 9 on defense. This is probably the biggest overhaul in the 6 seasons under Chris Peterson. I'm sure that it is. What do you know about this team that you didn't know 3 to 4 weeks ago?
Not much, because we got to see basically the same team in spring, and not much has changed then. The one thing obviously has changed is that a lot more freshmen are involved. But the freshmen that really made the biggest difference, I think, even in spring, guys like Cameron Williams, for sure, the true freshman safety. He's going to make an impact, and that was one of the things that I think really stood out, not just in spring, but obviously he picked up kind of where he left off in fall camp as well. In fact, they've kind of changed Jimmy Lake and Will Harris back there with the defensive backs. They lost every single corner, starting corner and starting safety in their lineup. They all went pro last year, which is a unique thing in and of itself for Washington. But they kind of rearranged things so that their one starter from last year, Miles Bryant, is not the nickel corner or the slot corner anymore. He has been moved back to safety. And so that's allowed them to bring in more of these athletic corners, athletic slot guys. And they're going to have a guy like Elijah Molden at the slot corner nickel. They're going to have guys like Kyler Gordon and Keith Taylor at the corners now, bringing in a long guy like Dominic Hampton back there. But Cameron Williams, the true freshman, and the fifth-year senior original walk-on, Miles Bryant, look like they could be the starting safeties right now. So that is a bit of a switch, because they didn't do that much in spring ball, but they did kind of reconfigure how they wanted to do the depth in the secondary in fall. And it looks like that was something that was pretty constant, at least through the first 5 practices in fall camp, which is what we got to see. So that's a big thing. And then there's obviously some freshmen like Puka Nacua at receiver, Leatu Latu, the outside linebacker. Everyone's raved about him as well. He's a guy that, he comes in with a rugby background. He's 6'4", 275. And he doesn't look like a freshman. He comes off the bus and you're like, okay, that's a 4th-year senior, 5th-year senior. So there's some big bodies that they've brought in for sure. In terms of scheme and things like that, and in terms of, do they do some things differently with a guy like Jacob Eason, for instance, as we talked about, didn't really see anything different that way. They're also replacing Myles Gaskin, the 4-year starter, the guy who had 4 1,000 or 1,200 actually straight seasons, and had over 5,000 yards in total running at Washington. Washington's all-time leading rusher. They're trying to replace him. That's difficult. They've got 3 juniors in line that are going to try to do that, starting with Savon Ahmed and then Sean McGrew and Kamari Pleasant. So that's interesting, trying to see them work. And they're not getting a ton of work, Mark, because Chris Peterson's really keen on the idea of kind of keeping those guys in bubble wrap, because he knows how, the punishment that you can take as a running back at that level. They want to keep them fresh. They want to keep them rotating in there, and they want to keep them productive. So we haven't really gotten a chance to see much of them this fall, but we kind of know what they've done in years past. So those are some things that I think, we saw in fall that maybe we didn't see a ton of in spring, but overall, it certainly feels like what we saw in fall, at least the 5 practices that we saw before the media got shut out, was that it was definitely kind of a continuation of what we saw back in April.